Let's get salty!
Hey everyone, it's Zeddy here again today with a brand new video. Before we get to the topic, I think we're like 50, as of recording this, we're like 50 subs away from 25k. Super excited. We'll have some announcements to make, hopefully in tomorrow's video, if you guys keep hitting that button, of course. But anyways, today's video topic is about Wild. We haven't talked about Wild in a while. There's a bunch of reverted cards. We've had the new expansion. Let things settle down a bit, but I think it is time to talk about Wild and a card that just needs to get changed. And it's a card that I have probably talked about more than any other card in regards to Wild since I started this channel just 14 months ago. And that is Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Mage card, 2 mana 3/2. Every spell you cast, it makes your spells cost 1 less, and that can make spells cost 0. And this card just is the center of so many problems, whether it's been Wild or even Standard in recent years. And I thought I'd go over the history of it a little bit, talk about what it's doing to really make the game awful and Wild right now, and what should be done about it. So starting off with the history of Sorcerer's Apprentice, this card was introduced at the very beginning. It's part of the classic set, and it was like a tempo type of card. You played alongside Mana Worm, you could cheat out like a Ice Lance, or play a Frostbolt or Arcane Missiles for cheap. Get some burn in, but overall, that was basically it. It was a tempo card, it could push some damage, and it was decent at that, and that's basically its purpose for quite some time, until more stuff was introduced, the new quests, the Open the Waygate quest. When it was introduced, it opened the doors for Exodia Mage, where you had Sorcerer's Apprentice, you had Molten Reflection, you had Archmage Antonidas, and you could set up a turn where you play Apprentice, Reflection, take the next turn, and you have infinite damage Archmage Antonidas. And it was, you know, that deck was never super powerful, and it was kind of fun, but it was slow. It took a while to get your quest done. You had to play cards like Kabbalah's Tome, which were awful, and, you know, run some pretty bad cards to get it done. And the deck was never a top tier deck, like tier 3 at the very best. But this was like the start of Apprentice really kind of showing how she could, you know, make things a little bit problematic. But again, not a big deal. Basically, Apprentice hasn't been that problematic until very recently, like the last few years, where in Standard we saw like Mana Cyclone come into the game. Mana Cyclone is where things really started to open up. In Standard, you had Cyclone, like Conjurer's Giant Mage, which became very problematic, where you just go Apprentice, like Magic Trick, a bunch of cheap spells, get a Cyclone, get a cheap Mountain Giant, conjures it out, and just break the game basically. Create these giant board states you couldn't possibly answer, and that led to Conjurer's Culling getting nerfed, and eventually Mountain Giants getting Hall of Fame. But in Wild, it was taken to a new level in Quest Mage, where you had Cyclone and the Open the Waygate quest, and all of a sudden you were completing the quest in like turns 3, 4, and 5, and creating this extremely polarized, unfun matchup where it eventually led to the quest being nerfed for Mage. And that wasn't the biggest nerf. It really didn't impact the deck a lot until basically aggro became a really powerful, the next expansion, kind of, you know, putting Quest Mage in its place. It became a little bit too slow. It couldn't keep up with the aggro, and people really despised that Quest Mage archetype. It was one of the most hated decks I've seen in a long time because it just destroyed all slower decks. It obliterated. It was super polarizing, and it could high roll aggro, but with the power level of aggro going up so much, again, Apprentice was kind of kept in check. Kind of. Not really, but kind of. At least at like the higher ranks where there's a lot of aggro to keep things in place. But even this last year, again, Apprentice became problematic in Standard alone with Mizaki Mage. You had Mizaki, and you could actively, with the addition of like Biscuit, Conjurer's Biscuit, OTK your opponent on like turns 5 and 6 with effectively no setup. They'd even use like an Incanter's Flow some of the times. Like, it just didn't really matter. But you would have cards like Incanter's Flow, which makes your cards even cheaper. And yeah, basically OTK your opponent with Mizaki very early. And basically, Igzor was asked about combo mage stuff, and I remember Core was asked about Apprentice last summer in regards to quest mage. They said it was on their radar, and I assume by on the radar they mean, you know what, we're gonna put it out of standard, we're gonna put it not in the core set, we won't have to deal with Apprentice, we'll let Wild worry about it, let Wild be Wild. And so effectively, yeah, it's not an issue in standard anymore, but it is in Wild, especially with the new card now, Refreshing Springwater. Refreshing Springwater has put these Apprentice decks over the top in Wild, like insane amount. I played Mizaki Mage at the beginning of the season, did very well, but now Flamewaker OTK Mage, as you saw highlighted in the intro, has just taken Wild by storm. I believe Corbett got double rank 1 legend with Flamewaker Mage, and it's not a deck that loses to aggro. It could struggle a bit against it, but basically its only bad matchups are like Secret Mage or like Hunter decks that run Snipe and things like that, but then you have to play Hunter, which sucks against everything else, and it doesn't do particularly bad. I've played it, I've had extreme success with it. It is warping the meta, I will admit. This deck is extremely warping the meta. It is hyper aggressive whenever I'm playing, and or you're having to play Ultra Disruption, like the 4-mana Watch Post and Dirty Rats and all this stuff to try and counter it, and it's like creating again this toxic, unhealthy meta, which is reminiscent of when Quest Mage was at its peak. And it always comes down to Apprentice. It's always Apprentice. They end up nerfing other cards as a result of it. Like I said, with the Mage quest, we've seen it. We saw it with Conjurer's Calling, or even Evocation. Evocation went from 2 mana as well because it was so good with Apprentice that it's always Apprentice that is his problem, because Apprentice fundamentally does what breaks the game the most consistently, the most often, and that is make cards cost 0. She makes spells cost 0, and when she was introduced way back when in like 2014, it didn't really matter if you made an Arcane Missiles or an Iceland 0, because that was like a finite damage reach, right? But with all the different cards we have, like a Magic Trick, like a Biscuit, we have Incanter's Flow, Refreshing Springwater, these cards that not only can cheat mana, but literally generate mana, like with Refreshing Springwater literally can give you mana when it's discounted. It's absurd. And Apprentice is a big part of what makes that a problem. And I would just like to see, for the sake of Wild's health, long term, to just change Apprentice. Let all these cool cards, these cool spells that do all this crazy stuff exist, because that's what their direction is with the game, is making these insane cheap spells that cheat mana and all that. But when you pile Apprentice into all of that, it just compounds to a state where you're having like turn 4 or 5 Exodius, and while there's Ice Block, while there's all these other tools like Flamewaker and all that, and the highlight I showed at the beginning of the game was like turn 9 or 7 or something. I have OTK'd with this deck on turn 4, 5, and it's not that rare. It takes 1 Incanter's Flow, really, 1 Biscuit, and you just Luna and you go off. Like, the deck is insane, and Apprentice is a big part of it, and I just feel, I know they're not wanting to do much nerfing for Wild, but they have nerfed for Wild before. We've seen Naga, which makes everything cost 0, nerfed. We saw the Snip Snap effect, which made all your Echo stuff cost 0, nerfed. It does what they like to nerf for Wild. It makes game states, like games end way too early, cheats an absurd amount of mana, making things 0. It's all the things we've seen addressed in Wild before, and I would like to see it addressed at some point. I think it's a significant issue, and I think Apprentice should get hit, even though it's a Wild card, and let Wild be Wild. But let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree. Should Apprentice be changed so that we can get away from these toxic Apprentice decks forever and ever, or is that just going to be a thing forever and ever in Wild and should be a thing? Let me know. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day and stay salty, my friends.